goofing around with the 26, which was a pretty damn accurate piece of gear if it was tuned right. And we start tracking this aircraft at 80,000 feet. And we got, we're swinging the scope and we're figuring on degrees, how fast we're swinging the antenna and all this kind of stuff. We figured this guy was doing 2,000 miles an hour. And we're looking at each other, we're thinking, UFO. And of course, then you're afraid to report it because then you'd be considered a little bit screwy. But it turned out the Americans were testing their, that Blackbird, the spy plane, SR-71. It was called the Y-12 at that time. But that's what they were doing. And we, just by chance, caught them. We were goofing around. The antenna wasn't supposed to be pointed in this area. But we took manual control and we were goofing around.
Goodbye.
The radar itself, you get up by the beam. I mean, it would be like just a big microwave oven if you ever got yourself exposed to that beam constantly, and far more powerful than a microwave, I'll tell you. But you just stayed out of the beam when you're up checking on things, and you had to be knowledgeable enough you knew the danger that was there and you didn't expose yourself to it. Depending on how long you were exposed to it and stuff like that, but it would actually cook you from the inside out. It would bounce off your bones and start cooking you from the inside out.
In the power plant, there were 2 turbines running. The turbines were running at 60 cycles, working on natural gas. The natural gas had a 2 to a 3-inch pipe coming into the turbine. And as a backup fuel, they had diesel fuel in case anything did happen to the natural gas line. And it gave the turbine or power plant a redundancy factor to make sure that the power plant would maintain operation 24 hours a day.
At first, I was maybe far more concerned about it, but as time went on, I got to realize, well, they're really not going to, either side is going to drop any bombs simply because both sides are going to be affected from it.
Anything that you put into the military is a form of subsidy to the civilian organization. Someone in their wisdom said it's a way of subsidizing industry. And that's really looking back on it, quite often this was the case. But in the meantime, I think it was when you look at it, it was very wasteful.
This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
Man, those trees sure have grown.
For sure.
Boy, they were just little saplings.
So was the weeds.
Yeah. What a shame. Well, look at the shoes. Oh, if there's some balls around, we could have a game.
Smell like they've still been used. Yeah, dirty shame to leave it in this mess.
Yeah. You know, they were pretty straight alleys, too.
Yeah.
For old ones.
I think somebody at the bottom and used them.
All that good birch plywood, you know, there was hardly any maintenance to that when we used to just have to varnish it once in a while. I suppose they still smell about the same as they did years ago, eh? Well, you know, they're not bad.
In better shape than the ones I got at home.
Yeah. Yeah, mine, I've had mine for about 40 years now, I guess.
NORAD, it stands for North American Aerospace Defense Command. The agreement was signed between the Americans and Canadians in 1959. And what it said, it set up a series of regions and sectors that have evolved over the years. They were designed to defend the continental United States and Canada. That was the main thrust of the agreement. And the NORAD headquarters in Colorado Springs had a Canadian and an American commander. The American commander was the overall commander, the Canadian was a deputy. And the Canadian commander had to be approved by the president, and the American commander had to be approved by the prime minister. Now, as you come back down the chain below Colorado Springs, you had smaller air divisions, which were broken down into 24th NORAD region in Colorado Springs, 22nd NORAD region in North Bay, Ontario, and went crisscross the country. Now, those regions broke down into the radar sites. Each radar site in that sector fed data into that region.
The DEW line was called, just as it says, it was called the Distance Early Warning System. And of course, that would trigger all of these radar sites in the Pinetree Line to start looking in that sector because they knew there was an airplane coming out of the north. And then from here, they control, not from this base, but from within this system, they could control fighter airplanes, which would be scrambled out of Cold Lake, Alberta, Comox, BC, North Bay, Ontario, Chicoutimi, Quebec, et cetera, and they could scramble these and intercept them on the way down. And of course, they use the radar data from here because they could tell where the airplane was within plus or minus 1/4 of a mile.
We were a slave unit in that we were controlled by our main center, which would later years was North Bay, but at one time it used to be Maelstrom Air Force Base in Montana. They would send in requests basically on our equipment, and we would, the equipment would actually automatically turn to the request that they sent in, and we would take a reading on it.
When the Cuban Missile Crisis came about, I was stationed on a course in Biloxi, Mississippi, so I was, and there were a few other Canadians there along with me, and so we were probably closer to it than any other Canadians going. And we were at an American Air Force base taking a course on a piece of equipment which was going to be used on the Pinetree Line. And of course, it was just the security at this Air Force base just went from waving you through at the guardhouse in the morning to you better get out of your car, and there's about 3 guys standing around with Sten guns, and they would have shot you if you'd have just moved a muscle. It was quite strange, actually. And of course, I had my family with me down there. We were living in a trailer park just right on the Gulf Coast, just down from the base. And it was pretty scary. We were concerned that something was going to happen. You know, somebody would make a mistake, I guess, more than anything else, because that's the kind of thing that happens. There was always a threat of a nuclear attack. I don't think anybody really dwelt on the fact that it was even a possibility or even a remote possibility. At least I didn't. And I know from talking to lots of other people that they didn't either. It was more, we had a job to do. We were sent here, and we did the best job we could.
The purpose of the radar towers was a deterrent to the Cold War. We were here to make sure that no Soviet airplanes were in our airspace. As technicians, we really gave it no thought. From one day to the next, we had a job to do to keep the radar operational. We took that very seriously. And occasionally we had NORAD exercises, and at that time you were made more aware of the Cold War threat, but really we didn't give it a lot of thought. We were, all of us, very conscientious in keeping the radar operational to do its task. And as far as a threat from the Soviets, we really didn't think about it. Even on the exercises, they were more of a nuisance to our day-to-day routine than anything else.
When I went into the military and I was, you might say, exposed to the potential of a nuclear war, I was not concerned. I was not concerned at all. I think I had done the calculations long before that it would be any kind of a nuclear war would be mutual destruction. I was very much aware of that, and I stated that to my son and my wife, and we just weren't worried about it. I just felt sensible people were going to continue doing sensible things, and so it never bothered me. And I was a little bit mystified when I heard people sort of being very concerned that there could be a all-out nuclear war. That never bothered me. It never entered my mind. It didn't then. It doesn't now.
Well, we were always, I think all the teachers that were here were very concerned about the standards so that these people wouldn't be shortchanged because they moved or because we failed in our commitment to teach them. And I must say that we worked well together. We all enjoyed being here. We tried to make it as good as possible because, you know, these people were moving from place to place and we were more or less stable. So that it was most important that we make these people and the children and their parents as comfortable as they could be. I think the domes always became interesting to the new people, and the children would ask, well, what does that do? Well, we tried to say, well, it's something like a telephone or TV that you can send messages across the world, around the world. And if they were at all familiar with the TV, well, they would quickly understand that, you see. We always tried to relate it to something that they would understand, that they knew in their homes, for example, and how the world was in communication, whether they were a friend or an enemy.
Well, my children didn't know anything about the Cold War, and I don't even know if my wife really realized it, but we were both young. I don't think we thought too much of it. As with a lot of PMQ children, a lot of them didn't know what their fathers did, really, for sure. I think my children knew that I repaired things, you know, because I was always around, but no, it never was a big factor. Maybe it was just our way of life.
We had alerts here. They were normally called by the headquarters, and I don't mean this headquarters. They were called by the control center that we were reporting to, which was Great Falls, Montana. That's where all of our data went, and of course they would just and push the button, and the sirens would go here, and of course everybody had to report to the place of duty. And then of course it was evaluated, and normally when these things happen, they would have, you know, B-47s or something that they'd sent up north, and they'd have them coming back down over, and of course they would scramble fighters out of Cold Lake from here, for instance, and intercept these things. So it was very, very real. I mean, most people, I'm sure the CO at each of these bases probably knew that it wasn't real, but just about everybody else, it was the real thing as far as they were concerned. And you better do your job properly.
I remember walking around that catwalk doing an inspection of the dome.
Wooden handrail,
outside,
yeah.
But what really sticks in my mind was the team that went across the country painting the domes.
Doing the domes, yeah.
And they hired university students to do the painting. And I thought, there is no way on earth that I would do a job like that.
Oh, you wouldn't get me on there neither.
The first, I remember we had a rope that went from the top and hung down to knock snow off with. And that rope may have been there, I don't know how many years it was between paint jobs.
Yeah, that was our first contact
But
to
the
get on
first,
the roof.
the first kid had to take that rope and go hand over hand up to the top and replace it with a good rope.
Every time they did a paint job, they replaced it, yeah.
Yeah. And then, well, they had to have a good rope because they used it to get up. And they would stand on top of the dome in the wind, and it's an inflatable rubber thing, and paint down with a roller as far as they could reach. And somebody on the catwalk painting up as far as they could reach, and that left a gap in the middle. And some guy wrapped the rope around his waist and went up halfway, painted as far as he could reach, and then bounced.
Yeah, all around the place.
Around until he moved to a new spot and painted there.
There were occasions where people thought that there was going to be an invasion. One time well, the main thing was in Colorado Springs, Colorado. Cheyenne Mountain was the main control center, I guess, for North America. North Bay was actually its backup. But there was one occasion where, as it turned out, a part on the computer failed. And they thought they were being invaded. One time in, where was I? In Holberg. We were at actual war for about 10 minutes, in a state of war, readiness. And it was kind of goofy because when it happened, I mean, you just had your midnight crew up manning the radar. Everybody else was on the bus going up to work, I guess. And when we came into work, I can remember Charlie Rollet was working. Was he ever glad to see us? But what it was is a computer part had failed, and it thought there was an invasion. Another time, many, many years ago when the radar was new, is they detected the moon coming up over the North Pole or the Arctic, and it also looked like a mass invasion until somebody realized the bloody thing wasn't moving. Same thing out in Holberg when we got what we call a temperature inversion. It would bend our beam. What would normally go out in a straight line, it would bend it down, and we'd start picking up ships at certain times. And we'd have all these targets until somebody kind of looked at it and says, don't know anything that can fly about 5 miles an hour.
Gee, that was a fine roof, too.
Don't you remember that little card they had in the mess hall there for a nuclear attack? Or in mess?
No, what was that?
The one that says all the different steps you had to go through in case of a nuclear attack. You know, what amounted to was the one all of a sudden you could see the bomb explode. You bend over as far as you could backwards and then kiss your ass goodbye.
Yeah, now I remember that part. Look at that floor, how good it stayed, eh?
Oh, that's for sure.
Man, oh man. You know, that was easy.
That's all just what's cement under that or what?
Yep, just cement under it.
Cement.
All the
tile.
other places I was at was hardwood flooring, and you had well, this was hardwood flooring at one time, and they wouldn't put this over top of it because there was less maintenance on it.
Well, it is. Lasted a lot longer than the other.
Yeah, we used to have
this, though, the heck.
The only dances I can remember having in here, we had a sea Christmas party dance in here. I guess there's a few others.
Yeah, well, they had their carnival dances and stuff like that.
That's right, yeah, we had the carnival dance, yeah.
We had 3 radar sets here, and we had which was a height finders and a search radar, and a data processing equipment. And each one of those systems probably cost $1 million, along with all the associated equipment that went with it. I mean, there was the infrastructure on this place, for instance. You know, there was everything had to be built. There was a sewer plant, the water plant. There was a power plant for heating this building that we're in now, and many of the other buildings on base, all of the barrack blocks, the mess hall, things like this, they were all heated from the central heating plant, plus the towers were all heated from the central heating plant. So that was running year-round.
I really sort of wonder about people saying they need these strong defenses. Well, some defense, yes, but I think may have been overdone. But at the time, who was to say how much was enough? But looking back on it, I think it was overdone. In essence, we had 3 layers of radar systems.
I don't know, I guess more of a shame that they couldn't have been utilized, although I see the problem of trying to reuse the buildings other than what they were intended for, and mainly the cost of utilities and stuff. It doesn't bother me as much as I suppose it would a lot of people, and yet I maintained it all, you know. But I can see the viewpoint of why they had to let it go to begin with and why they couldn't keep up with the present system. But I can't say it's a waste of taxpayers' dollars neither, because we got good value out of it when we were using it.
When I was doing radar maintenance in Beausejour, Manitoba, one day we needed parts, tubes actually, for the equipment we were working on. And I went down into our supply area myself, took the key because the fellow from supply was gone for the day. I went down there and went rooting through the shelves myself and found the tubes we needed, rocked them back up to the tower, opened them up, and printed right on the tubes. And we're talking here, now we're talking late 70s here, maybe 77. Printed right on the tubes, was made in USSR. This is no lie. So right then and there, I'm kind of befuddled. I said, what the hell? So, I mean, our equipment was getting quite old at this time, and we'd exhausted our supplies from North America. Nobody was making these things anymore. So they'd somehow cut a deal. The Soviets were still making these things, and they'd somehow cut a deal to come up with these tubes. So right then and there, you're starting to think, now just what the hell's going on here? So maybe it wasn't so threatening after all.
Here, girls. Come on, girls. Here, girls. Come on, girls. The base was closed down in '86. It was purchased in '87 by the Stage Hill Development Corporation. This consisted of surrounding RMs on towns, and it was run as by this corporation. They had tried to do some manufacturing. They had some processing in the canteen. They made soups and other things. They also had conventions here. At one time, they was building fire trucks, so it tried to make a development center. It did not turn out so well. They ran short of money, and finally they came to an auction sale, and that's where I got involved in the auction to purchase it 4 years ago.
I was very, very proud to be associated with C.F.S. Dana. It was a good base. The morale was extremely high, and people got along well. There was no animosity or anything. The grounds people, which were civilians mainly, kept the grass cut immaculately. It almost makes me want to cry when I look outside and see the absolute mess that this place is. I mean, I know there's no sense keeping it open if it's not going to be used for anything. But anybody with 10 cents worth of brain in their head should have realized this whole thing had such an infrastructure. They could have turned this so quickly into a minimum security jail type of situation. But, you know, it's not just this base. There were 26 of these things. I mean, to turn it into a buffalo ranch, well, and let them wander all over this thing is just absolutely mind-boggling. I cannot believe it.
you know, the legacy of the Cold War, I feel it's multifaceted, really. One is it has improved our standard of living through technical improvement. You know, satellites, communications, in other words, navigation systems, and transportation, and just a lot of technical things that have been improved. That's one. Two, anytime there's sort of a major event, whether it's a war or something else, I always feel that there is some kind of collective consciousness that, in this case, where the Cold War was predominating, there's this collective consciousness that has an incremental improvement in the wisdom, collectively. In other words, all sides, everybody. We have found better ways of communicating and deciding solutions to problems. And I'm sure that it's true of the Russia or the USSR. In other words, it's not USSR now, but I mean all the countries involved there. And I think it is true worldwide. There seems to be that change. I mean, there was a change during the Second World War, and I think there's another small change in I would call it an improvement in the wisdom of the collective consciousness. I think there will be a time when the collective consciousness will incrementally keep improving in the wisdom to the point where wars will be something of the past.
How long do you think that'll take?
Many generations.
That's not too bad of a day out anyway.
It's kind of nice to see it, but I think I prefer to remember it the other way.
But I guess it's the way life is, eh?
That's for sure. It carries on.